Hello again. A film about Vikings has recently been released, and because it is historically accurate, that is to say, it shows Vikings as all being white, with women looking after the home and raising children while the men go off to fight, it has been accused of pandering to white supremacists. The film is called The Northman. I dare say some viewers have heard of it. It's very weird and says a great deal about the modern world that a film which shows Europe as being white and men and women following traditional roles should be seen as inciting or being associated in some way with racism and white supremacists. I give a link in the description to this video to the article that was published in The Guardian about this. It's very weird. One thing we find in it is that we learn of the myth that medieval Europe was entirely white, and we're told that recent research reveals that societies such as those in Viking-era Scandinavia were in fact multicultural and multiracial. This is of course completely untrue, but I suppose that the person who wrote this piece is following the old Nazi idea that if you are bold enough with your lies and are big enough, then there's a better chance of being believed. Later, we learn the slender grounds for making such a ridiculous claim. It is because the Vikings, and I quote, were travellers. They ranged far across Europe and the Arctic, and they engaged and mixed with neighbouring cultures. I have no idea what is meant by engaging with a neighbouring culture. I mean, I suppose you could say that when people go on holiday in France, they're engaging with a neighbouring culture, and that makes them multiracial in some way. I imagine that's what he means. In other words, because the Vikings encountered Eskimos on their travels, that, in some sense, made their society multiracial. This is a seriously strange way of looking at what is meant by multiracial, but still. The chap who wrote this piece does not approve of people showing Europe as having been exclusively white in the past, and he's also against traditional roles for men and women, of course. He says, the Northman's 10th century society appears to be uniformly white and firmly divided along patriarchal lines. Well, that's right. As a matter of fact, that's what European society was like a good deal more recently than the 10th century. During the Second World War, women stayed at home and raised children while their men went off to fight a war abroad. They were all white as well. The modern idea, where half the people are black or brown or coffee-coloured and some of the men wear dresses and call themselves Mary, is a very new thing in this part of the world. It wasn't like that even 40 or 50 years ago. Talking of right-wing groups, the man who wrote this piece says that many of these groups thrive on myths of an imagined European past, a time before racial mixing or progressive politics, when men were warriors and women were compliant childbearers. The point is, of course, that these are not myths at all. It is simply how things used to be until a few decades ago. One can certainly debate whether it was a good thing or not, but that it was the case is indisputable. In my father's time and in my grandfather's time, the men went off and joined the army and went to war in France and across the world, and the women stayed at home and raised children and looked after their homes, and everybody was white. That's what Europe was like. It was like that during the Second World War and the First World War, and it was like it at the time of the Vikings. It seems that both Lord of the Rings and Game of Thrones fall down badly because they were set in mythical versions of Europe and appeal to alt-right types. I advise people to read this piece from The Guardian because the writer explains why Gawain and the Green Knight, which featured an Indian as the protagonist, is a good thing. as is the new Amazon version of the early years of the Lord of the Rings universe, in which there are black elves and dwarves, and that's a good thing for opposing fascists and racists. I suppose that one might say that things like Lord of the Rings are fantasies anyway, so it doesn't really matter. But when it comes to showing Europe in the past, I happen to believe that it does matter. And it's no bad thing if we show the world where everybody was white and men and women had separate and distinct roles. Some of us actually believe this was a better arrangement than that which we seem to have in the modern world.